evening, church. Welcome to the assembly tonight. Hope you guys sang some nice songs. We're in the book of Ezra. We're going to read from chapter 4 just now. Also, if you would like to keep your finger in a scripture, the book of Kings, 2 Kings chapter 17, we're going to read some verses there just now. The title of tonight's lesson is Cast Away, Impure Religion. Let's start. The Israelites fell into what we call polytheism and syncretism. Polytheism is the worship of numerous gods, and syncretism is the amalgamation of different religions. Okay, so they worship numerous gods and they amalgamate the different religions into their faith, their worship of Yahweh. It's important to remember these two big words for tonight: polytheism and syncretism. First, the Israelites, the first group of Israelites who committed that sin were the northern 10 tribes of Israel, and God dealt with them through the Assyrians in 721 BC when he conquered them. The Assyrian king conquered them and took them to foreign lands, and we're going to talk about that in a moment. Later on, the Jews of Judea, those of the tribe of Judah and Benjamin, they also got involved with polytheism and syncretism, and that caused God to get really angry with them. In 585 BC, Nebuchadnezzar came with his Babylonian army, conquered Jerusalem, burnt down the city, destroyed the temple, broke down the walls, and so the Babylonian exile started. I just wanted to point this out in the beginning, that the reason for the exile and the reason for the destruction of the northern 10 tribes was polytheism and syncretism. Okay, now Ezra and Nehemiah records how the remnant from exile returned. Cyrus, the mighty king of the Persian, was instructed by God to let the Jews return, and so they did return. They settled in their towns, they reclaimed their lands, they put down their bags, they gathered in Jerusalem to rebuild the altar, to make sacrifices to God, and then they started with building the temple, laying its foundation, and that's what we read last week. And we saw how this remnant, they sang with hearts filled with joy, some of them were crying when they saw this foundation and remembered the former glory of the previous temple. And I think so far we've managed to draw various applicable lessons from these guys and from these texts. And so to ease us into tonight's lesson, let me introduce the topic by using an illustration from one part of our ministry here. We have God has just boomed one particular area with new disciples, and you've been introduced to most of them through some of the videos that I've made, and so they're all sort of in this area together. And we used to meet in people's homes, but we can't find a home that's now big enough for us to meet in, and so that's become sort of a problem for us. And so we went to go meet at people's home that's a little bit bigger because we needed the space, and some of the people's children came with, and while we were having our service and discussions around the word, the kids were outside breaking some of the fruit and things like that. And we then left there, and we just received the message. The people whose house it is, they're still young Christians, they were a little bit concerned about the kids destroying their stuff, and they sent the message to the parents, please don't. And what that happened is, to our young church, it caused a little bit of a rift. And to be honest with you, I sort of was caught a little bit off guard and didn't make much of it. But here you had people that now said they don't want to go to those people's house anymore with their children. And then we've got people whose house it is, and they're saying, it almost looks like they're saying, leave your children at home, but they've got nobody else to take care of their children, and the children always needs to be welcome at church. And so you see how, in a very sneaky way, children playing with fruit outside in the garden while we're studying the Bible causes issues. And so we decided to go back to other people's house, and it was a little bit more crowded. And I just think I didn't handle that correctly, because I didn't think it was such a big issue. And so the lady from the house that had the fruit outside, she never attended Bible study anymore because she had to take care of her mom, who's frail and old, and she can't really leave her alone at all. And so one small way that Satan made an entry as things were just growing, we were just growing, we're just really excited and everything's great, and then Satan comes and he causes. You see, Satan is always looking for a way to stop progress. He's looking for a way to stop spiritual health and growth. And we need to be aware of his schemes, because what we experienced here is that Satan knew that for this family, their sensitivity is their fruit. And he knew for this family, their sensitivity is their children. And he used that to create a rift in the church. And so we need to be aware of his schemes. And so far, this remnant, they're busy building this temple. Everything's going well. Progress is being made. Everyone is excited. And then in the text for tonight, we'll see that they are going to face some uphill. Satan is on his way. So if you've got your Bible with you, please read with me. We're in Ezra chapter 4 from verse 1. It says there, when the enemies of Judah and Benjamin heard that the exiles were building a temple for the Lord, the God of Israel, they came to Zerubbabel and to the heads of the families and said, let us help you build, because like you, we seek your God and have been sacrificing to him since the time of Esarhaddon, king of Assyria, who brought us here. But Zerubbabel, Jeshua, and the rest of the heads of the families of Israel answered, you have no part with us in building a temple to our God. We alone will build it for the Lord, the God of Israel, as king of Cyrus, the king of Persia, commanded us. Then the peoples around them set out to discourage the people of Judah and make them afraid to go on building. They hired counselors to work against them and frustrated their plans during the reign of Cyrus, king of Persia, and down to the reign of Darius, the king of Persia. And so here we find the first time that now they are experiencing opposition. 4 questions I'd like to ask just about this text, and then I'm going to give us 3 lessons. The first question is this: who were these people? Who were the enemies of Judah? Well, they were the Samaritans. They were the Samaritans that we read about in the New Testament. They say in verse 2 that they were brought to the land by the Assyrian king Esarhaddon. And what Assyria specifically did was to take people captive from different nations, and then place them in a foreign land so they could intermix with the people of that land, to break down the people's culture and their religion. Now Assyria did this at least 3 times that we know of with Israel, the northern 10 tribes. Remember I spoke about them. Now, they took Israelites away, and then they replaced them with foreign people to come live in that land. And so the lands surrounding Jerusalem were filled with foreigners and aliens to the land. They were pagans. They worshipped other gods. And they intermarried with the leftover Israelites, and they produced what some people call a mongrel race that we read about in the New Testament as the Samaritans. So they had developed as a people in the land for at least about 130 years before Ezra arrived there. So that's question number 1. Who were they? They were the Samaritans. Number 2, why did they want to help with the temple? Well, I'd like to propose one of 2 reasons, or maybe a combination of both. First, they probably wanted the blessings of Yahweh, and we're going to read a text now that sort of indicates that. They wanted the God of Israel to bless them. Now, if they could keep Yahweh happy, like help build the temple, with his people, they could receive his favor in their endeavors. That might be one reason. A second reason that I find most scholars believe in is that they felt threatened by the Israelites and their unity. The temple would be a central point of their unity. The monotheism of the Israelites would be a threat to the ideologies that they held on to in their polytheism and their religion. If they had a say in the temple, they could have a say in the life of Israel. And so if they helped with the temple construction, they might earn their way into participating or into the participation of making decisions at the temple. They wanted to gain control. So either they knew Yahweh as the gateway or the portal to blessing, or they knew Yahweh was the portal to problems for them and their worship of other gods. And you might be wondering, but Michiel, didn't you say they worshipped other gods? They didn't worship Yahweh. Let's read what the text says. Read with me quickly. 2 Kings chapter 17. And I must say, I can't remember that I've ever read this. And I found it so interesting. This is 2 Kings chapter 17, verse 24. The king of Assyria brought people from Babylon, Cutha, Ava, Hamath, and Sepharvaim, and settled them in the towns of Samaria to replace the Israelites. They took over Samaria and lived in its towns. Do you get there? This is how it worked. When they first lived there, they did not worship the Lord. So he sent lions among them, and they killed some of the people. Wow, that's interesting. God sends lions to kill people? It was reported to the king of Assyria, the people you deported and resettled in the towns of Samaria do not know what the God of that country requires. He has sent lions among them, which are killing them off, because the people do not know what he requires. Then the king of Assyria gave this order: have one of the priests you took captive from Samaria go back to live there and teach the people what the God of the land requires. So one of the priests who had been exiled from Samaria came to live in Bethel and taught them how to worship the Lord. Nevertheless, each national group made its own gods in the several towns where they settled and set them up in the shrines the people of Samaria had made at the high places. The men from Babylon made Succoth Benoth, the men from Cutha made Nergal, and the men from Hamath made Ashima. The Avites made Nibas and Tartak, and the Sepharvites burned their children in the fires as sacrifices to Adramelech and Anamelech, the gods of Sepharvaim. They worshipped the Lord, but they also appointed all sorts of their own people to officiate for them as priests in the shrines at the high places. They worshipped the Lord, but they also served their own gods, in accordance with the customs of the nations from which they had been brought. And so, what do we see here? They were practicing polytheism and syncretism. They were doing the same things that the Israelites did before they went into exile. So they did worship the God of Israel, but on their own terms and with their own gods. They were polytheists, and their religion was a form of syncretism. That's question number 2. Question number 3. Why did the remnant say, no, you can't help us build the temple? Why did they refuse their hand? Well, because they were polytheists. They say in the text, we seek your God as you do. That is a lie. The word seek means, in the Hebrew, to be a faithful worshipper and a diligent follower of Yahweh. And this was not the case. Let's read further here in 2 Kings from chapter 17, verse 34. To this day they persist in their former practices. They neither worship the Lord, nor adhere to the decrees and ordinances, the laws and the commands that the Lord gave the descendants of Jacob, whom he named Israel. When the Lord made a covenant with the Israelites, he commanded them, do not worship any other gods, or bow down to them, serve them, or sacrifice to them. But the Lord who brought you up out of Egypt with mighty power and outstretched arm is the one you must worship. To him you shall bow down, and to him offer sacrifices. And so the list goes on. These people, they did not worship God like that. And so they were lying. The Israelites didn't have any problem with any other person from any other race worshipping their God. That's great. But if you do it, then do it properly. Do it wholeheartedly. We see later in Ezra 6 verse 21 that the Israelites allowed some of these Samaritans to join them. But only after they demonstrated that they've got pure intentions and that they were committed to Yahweh. Now, these guys didn't worship the God of Israel acceptably. If they did, why didn't they already rebuild the temple 130 years ago? They've been there for so long. They didn't make sacrifices to God as prescribed in the Torah, and they didn't worship him as the only God. So, the Jews rejected them because of the way that they were practicing their religion. And the Jews were thinking to themselves, man, you guys are practicing polytheism and syncretism, and that's the very thing that got us into exile. We've just come back from exile, okay? We cannot afford to be yoked together with you guys, okay? And do things that should never be done. We've just been disciplined. It's like my son breaks the fence and I give him a hiding, and then he gets a friend that tells him, hey, come, can I help you break the fence? No. They would be fools to be mingled up in something that caused the exile again. Merely adding Yahweh to the list of gods one worships is not acceptable to him and does not establish a true relationship with him. Those who worship more than one God cannot be considered to be a part of God's people and cannot truly share in God's work in the world. And so the Israelite leaders basically said, you are not Jews, you do not worship Yahweh correctly, therefore you cannot have a part in this. And by the way, we have been tasked by Cyrus to rebuild, and you guys are not part of that package deal. A fourth question that comes to my mind when I read this text in Ezra chapter 4 is, why did these enemies decide then to discourage the remnant from building further? A more direct translation of verse 4, a translation that I prefer, is this: Then the people of the land weakened the hands of the people of Judah and troubled them in building, and hired counselors against them to frustrate their purpose. And they did this by paying officials in the court of the Persian Empire to oppose the work, as we will see next week. But why did they want to stop the work? And we've already touched on it. You know, I've tried to answer this question in my mind. It's difficult to answer why they hated the Jews so much. It is almost the same question. Why do people still today hate the Jews so much? Why did Hitler hate the Jews so much? I mean, there's never been a nation more persecuted than the Jews. Why did Muhammad, the founder of the Islamic religion, why did he specifically hate the Jews? Why does everybody always want the Jews exterminated and removed and kept from being on the planet? What is the problem? It is as if there is a spiritual power behind the scenes, an evil spiritual power, maybe we can call him Satan, that specifically targets the nation that God loved and maybe even still loves today. I think there is a deep spiritual reason in that Satan hates the Jews, because that is the nation that God has always protected. But if I had to pick out some practical reasons why I think these people specifically hate the Jews at this time, was firstly because if the temple is built, the people will be unified. History has shown that when the Israelites stood together with their God, they were impenetrable. It's very much like Israel today and the Iron Dome. I mean, the Palestinians can't destroy Israel. That whole Middle East is trying to destroy Israel. They can't. Because when Israel stands together, they're impenetrable. They would simply be too powerful. Nobody would be able to move them. And then they'd become an authority in the region. And, these people didn't want that. Maybe a second reason is that Israelite monotheism would pose a threat to Samaritan polytheism. The Israelites was a threat to the Samaritan religion and way of life. Thirdly, maybe it was just a simple response to the rejection that they experienced. When the Israelites rejected their offer to help, they were indirectly telling them, we don't accept you as Jews, and we don't accept your religion. In this way, they brought across the idea that they are not pure, and therefore are sub-Jews, mongrels, and inferior to the Jews of the remnant. And I think that's enough to make anybody try to destroy you. I mean, we don't like being rejected. Let's just be real. Now, I want us to bring this home. Let me make some relevant comments and just 3 points I'd like us to take home today. Firstly, Christianity's worst enemies are those who say they are Christians when they are not. Christianity's worst enemies are those who say they are Christians when they are not. Ezra chapter 3 verse 3 says that the Jews knew the Samaritans were a threat to them, that they were fearful of this threat. Well, why be scared of people that worship the same God as you? Why should Christians be scared of other Christians and be careful of them? Because it wasn't the only God that they worshipped. That's the problem. The only problem was that it wasn't the only God they worshipped. Half faithfulness is an indirect way to create weak faith and weak religion. It is the most dangerous form of killing something. You want something to die. You allow weakness to infiltrate it, and slowly it dies. In South Africa, we've got a saying here among the Africans, where they say what they are doing is they are, when you take a frog and you put him in cold water on a stove in a pot, and you just switch on the stove lightly so that the water heats up slowly but surely, that frog doesn't even realize the water is heating up. Before he knows it, the water is boiling and he's dead. That's how it works. And that's what they're trying to do with the political situation here in South Africa. They make things get worse and worse and worse without people realizing it until the whole country has been broken down. And this is the same thing that will happen in the church when you allow weak, half-baked Christians to penetrate leadership, to penetrate the core structures of the church. Slowly but surely, it will kill the church. Once you have you let half-bred Jews who are half-faithful Yahweh worshippers, once you let them in, their lukewarmness will seep through the whole batch, and they will bring into the Israelite fold their other religions as well as its practices. You see, the worst enemies to the Jews were those who claimed to be Jews, but they were not. And for us as Christians, it is still the single biggest problem. Our biggest enemy is not Islam, Hinduism, or atheism. It's lukewarm Christianity, because that's the type of Christianity that God spits out of his mouth. He vomits it out. Christians who say that they are Christians, but who are they say they're Christians, but they are not. They're the biggest enemy to Christianity. I watched a documentary this week of a crime spree, a murder spree that took place in Krugersdorp, led by a 42nd generational witch or ex-witch, but I think she's still a witch. A documentary that's called Devil's Dorp. We actually lived in that town. You have this mastermind witch that confessed to being a genuine Christian, yet she orchestrated the murder of at least 11 people. The murders were committed based on the premise of spiritual authority. Okay? Innocent people were confused and deceived, and they received death, yet they were Bible scholars. How's that? The name of Christianity has been shrouded with evil in that whole story. That's just one example of how you can claim to be a Christian yet murder people. And Jesus spoke about this in Matthew 7:21, didn't he? We often talk about this. Not everybody who says to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven, but only those who do the will of my Father who is in heaven. Many will come to me on that day and say, Lord, did we not prophesy in your name, drive out demons in your name, perform many miracles in your name? And I will say to them, away from me, you evildoers, for I never knew you. And it's such a clear text that shows us that not everybody who holds on to Jesus really holds on to Jesus. We should actually not allow half-bred, half-faithful Christians to have a say in the church. And this is what the Jews were trying to avoid with the Samaritans. We can't let you participate in the building of this temple. But it's a difficult task. Because how do we know who are the real Christians and who aren't? Well, I'll leave that for another day, because we don't have enough time for that tonight. But let me point out a few reasons why it is important to keep polytheistic Christians at bay. Now, what's a polytheistic Christian? It's a person who worships Jesus, but not only him. It's a person who worships his work, who worships money, maybe even worships his wife or husband or hobby. That's a polytheistic Christian. It's a person that's not totally sold out on Christ. That is a very dangerous Christian. Now, why is it important that we need to be careful with them? It's because they are not fully devoted. And if they're not fully devoted, they will not be fully committed. And if someone isn't fully committed, they will quickly drift and become a liability to the church instead of a source of strength for the church. Secondly, because they don't really have contact with the major things of the faith. They tend to focus on and be occupied with the minor things of the faith, which generally causes schisms and divisions in the church. And thirdly, because humans influence humans. We need to know that half-baked Christians will influence others in the church to become like them. A little yeast works through the whole batch of dough. And so that's my first point that I'd like us to remember for tonight. Christianity's worst enemies are those who say they are Christians when they are not. Secondly, expect to be hated if you love the truth. Expect to be hated if you love truth. I find it interesting throughout Israel's history how the pagans wanted always to mingle, to mix, to intermarry, and share religion with God's people. They're always trying to infiltrate God's people. They're always trying to disrupt the holiness of Israel. Isn't it interesting? And God warned him of that. The wicked always wants to dilute and disturb the truth. They try to dilute and disturb holiness and righteousness. Pagan nations always want to mix races, mix religions, and disturb cultures and mix cultures. And God always called for the opposite. And so he says, come out from among them. Be separate. Be a new creature surrounded by sound advice and wise people. Surround yourself with people who fear the Lord. It is as if God is saying, be exclusive, and the pagans are saying, be inclusive. But God says, don't let the Samaritans join you. They are not a part of you. They don't worship me in heart. The Samaritans say, let us join you. Include us. Let's overcome our differences. You guys are bigots for not letting us join you, for not letting us be a part of you, for rejecting our culture and religions. Does any of this sound familiar? Isn't this exactly what we're going through right now? One commentator said the following, I'll read it for you. In contemporary Western culture, religious exclusivism is seen by many as bigotry. The assumption is that if one cannot accept others' beliefs as being just as valid as one's own, one must be unloving and judgmental as well. It seems natural to assume that people will be unable to see that we love them if they think that we reject them. Our love for truth will by default cause people to hate us. When we stand up for biblical, scientific, and biological truth, that gender is binary, that marriage is meant for male and female, and if we stand up for the rational theological truth that Jesus, rational and historical truth, that Jesus alone is the author of salvation, that not everybody who is a good person will avoid hell, that all religions aren't correct or in the same par, people will dislike us, hate us, and they will become our enemies. In fact, it's happening right now. And they will judge us as unloving. You guys are unloving. How could you follow a God of love, but you disapprove of people's actions whom He loves? I mean, God is all-inclusive, isn't He? He loves everybody, both the transgender person and the homosexual and the Muslim who decapitates the heads, decapitates people. And so there seems to be this tension between love and truth. Love and truth seems to be in opposition, doesn't it? Most people believe they are, but Paul doesn't seem to think so. 1 Corinthians chapter 13 verse 6 is such a powerful verse. Listen carefully. Love does not delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth. Let me just say the statement. Love rejoices with truth. They're always together. In other words, love wins when truth wins. Love loses when truth loses. It is because I love you that I refuse to accept the lie that you believe in. The Jews were demonstrating love by cutting off these Samaritans because they're saying, listen, you need to know that your polytheism is incorrect. It's incorrect. It will cause the wrath of God. You need to let go of your syncretism. We just came from captivity. Believe you me, we were locked out for many years. Some of our children died in a pagan land because of our polytheism. So the very reason the very act of rejecting the Samaritans is an act of love. The rejection is an act of love. In actual fact, if they let them join them building the temple, that would mean that they didn't love them. So love wins when truth wins. The lie that you believe in will destroy you, and I don't want that. I've got a brother here in the church who's got a sister, and I told you about they've got a boy, I think a 12-year-old boy who believes he's a girl and wants to go for a sex change and for gender therapy and all those kinds of things. And the sister says, well, you don't love my child if you don't let my child be who he is. And that is the worst imaginable thing to do, because the statistics are very clear on this, that gender transition, especially at that young age, it develops an increased likelihood of depression, psychological issues, and possibly even suicide. It increases the issues for him. If you love that child, you will let that child live in the gender he was born with, created with by God. But unfortunately, people won't understand it. They will just hate us for saying things like that. You don't love my child. No, I actually do love your child. That's why I'm saying these things. Paul experienced this often. You know, he wrote to the Galatians the following. He said, have I now become your enemy by telling you the truth? Galatians 4:16. It's part of who we are. We cannot escape it. We must expect it and take it on the chin. If we didn't love our God and we didn't love people, then we could keep quiet and just let every person go their own direction. Love does not let someone choose any path. Love helps people choose the safest path. There's a third point. If the wicked can't persuade you to be like them, they will force you through secular government. If the wicked can't persuade you to be like them, they will force you through secular government. Does that sound familiar? The way they wanted to stop the work of God was through the government. They paid counselors in government, as we'll see next week, to oppose the work in Jerusalem. If we can't persuade you, we will force you. Sounds familiar. It is exactly what people are doing today. If you refuse to call me by my gender pronoun, I will sue you. If you refuse to make a cake for my gay wedding, I will sue you and destroy your business. Let me conclude. Dark days are lying ahead for us, brothers and sisters. But it isn't the first time that God's people has gone through something like this. It's nothing new. We still have opposition when we stand for truth. We must expect it, but we mustn't buckle under it. I'm excited to see how the remnant handles this trial and this opposition. Have a great week. We love you guys. Miss you guys. Bye-bye.